of Egypt. Late this evening, the country's state-run Nile TV reporting new numbers, at least 33 new fatalities in Cairo and Alexandria, the two biggest cities. Another 180 people wounded. The wounded now topping 4,000. Since Wednesday, there are now more than 600 people killed. Also new, on its Facebook page, the Egyptian military saying they arrested 440, quote, armed men and terrorists, unquote. The fighting now widespread. Security forces clashing with Muslim Brotherhood fighters. Reports of sectarian attacks on Coptic Christian churches. A lot of conflicting information coming in, and accusations that frankly cannot be fully verified because of the truly chaotic situation on the ground. Some reporters there are calling it urban warfare, plain and simple. As always, we're being very careful about our reporting and making perfectly clear which are claims, which are solid, undisputed facts. One such fact is that at least some opponents of the military government are clearly willing to die for their cause. New video tonight shows it. May be very hard to watch. A man who we've highlighted, unarmed, walking straight into automatic weapons fire. Again, this is very tough stuff. You might want to turn away right now. Horrible situation, a very, very rough day on the ground in Egypt. Joining us now, Fred Pleitgen, our man in Cairo, also joining us by phone, a member of the opposition to the ousted President Morsi, the self-described moderate Ahmed El-Hawiri, and in Washington, Michael Duran, senior fellow at the Brookings Institution's Saban Center for Middle East Peace, Middle East Policy, I should say, and Arab analyst Robin Wright, senior fellow at the Woodrow Wilson Center. Fred, let me start with you in Cairo. So many on both sides dead or wounded, scores of churches burned. What's the latest that you're seeing on the ground?
Well, it certainly was a terrible situation on the ground, especially at downtown Cairo in a place called Ramses Square. What happened is, as you said, they called this the Day of Rage here. The Muslim Brotherhood and affiliated organizations organized protest marches that were supposed to go to this place, to Ramses Square. And when many of them reached that square, that's when those clashes started. And apparently live fire was used. The Egyptian government is saying that there were armed people among those protesters, that some of them opened fire. Of course, the Morsi supporters are saying that it was the government forces that opened fire first. But the clashes went on for a very long time. There are a lot of people who were killed. We're getting information also from some mosques in that area that there are dead bodies in those mosques. And apparently there is one mosque actually on that square where apparently 1,000 people are still trapped, and they are surrounded by armed people, pro-government people, and say they are afraid to come out. So it really was a very chaotic day here in Cairo. I saw some of these protest marches myself. They were gigantic. They went on for a very long time. And of course, there was a lot of confrontation and just really a lot of hatred in the air here throughout the better part of the day, Wolf.
Robin, the incredible violence, the hundreds from the Muslim Brotherhood have now been arrested. You're actually worried, Robin, and you and I have known each other for a long time. This country is descending into a period of civil strife, if not civil war. Is that right?
I think that's what we all fear now, that the fact is both sides are so polarized, and tragically there's no middle ground. There's no group of politicians who are emerging to create an alternative, to urge compromise, to try to broker between the two. The international community has had absolutely no impact. The UN is sending an envoy next week to try to see if there's any ground for compromise, any way of the international community playing a role in ending this violence. But the danger is that neither side is willing to compromise right now, and that it descends into what we saw in Algeria 20 years ago, which was a not just prolonged civil strife, but actually disintegrated into civil war.
Mike, you say the Obama administration has been too passive in its approach, that it's got to be more concerned about what's happening. What should the U.S. be doing in Egypt? What should officials have done?
Well, I think that we have to be very concerned about the fact that we're basically irrelevant to this process there. I think the first thing we have to do is take a much stronger line with General Sisi. On the one hand, the Muslim Brotherhood was definitely taking the country in a bad direction, but it's very hard to see how these events are going to improve the situation. This is basically a return to Mubarakism, and Mubarak ran the country into a cul-de-sac. I can't see how this is possibly going to make things better in any way.
Because it seems that you can make a strong case that the U.S. really can't make much of a difference either way, that U.S. influence in this current situation, Mike, is relatively weak.
Well, this is something that one hears a lot behind the scenes from the Obama administration, but there's an absolute certainty that if you step forward and say, I have no influence, I can't do anything, then you won't have any influence and you won't be able to do anything. I totally agree with what Robin said about the importance of developing a third path. And that's what the United States needs to define as its task. It needs to mobilize the international community and put pressure on Sisi and the Tumarid organization and others to create the third path, which would be a process, a political process toward a more democratic future.
Ahmed, you were part of the movement that ousted President Morsi, even though he was elected by the people. He did get 52% in a democratically elected contest. You say there never was a democracy, there was an impeachment, not a coup. What do you mean by this?
Well, to begin with, President Morsi's first and only objective was to build a democracy, build a democratic process in Egypt, and he failed to do that. There wasn't elections, and please do not reduce democracy into elections and a ballot box. Democracy constitutes that there's a constitution that is properly done and representative of the nation, that there is a parliament, that there's due political process, that we can stop the catastrophic and sectarian policies that he was imposing without needing to go to the streets. That there would be elected officials that we would trust and do that for us. There was no parliament, there was no due political process. He decreed himself above the law, he decreed himself above the constitution of the court and the regular court, and he ran through a constitution that is shameful to any nation through trickery and forgery. So, to begin with, this was not a democratic. He was not democratic. He was not running a democratic democracy. It was a totalitarian government that was trying to push the country to the ground.
I know you said the military crackdown on the sit-down was inevitable, and I know the Muslim Brotherhood and its supporters, they've used violence to be sure, including against some of those Coptic Christian churches. But here's the question: does the brutality of the military crackdown seem like the right move? Even Mohammed al-Baradei, the vice president under the new interim government, he couldn't take it anymore, and he quit.
Let's understand, the sit-down was not dispersed by the military, it was dispersed by the police force. And it was dispersed by the anti-riot forces in the police force, not by the military at all. And we do believe that the police force are extremely brutal. And we have been fighting against the police and trying to reform the police for several years now. But we have to remember one thing. The only person and the only authority that had the chance, a real chance of reforming the police was Mohammed Morsi and was Muslim Brotherhood. But it was extremely clear that Mohammed Morsi, once while he was in power, he did not want to reform the police force. He actually promoted all the corrupted leaders of the police force so he can use them against his political opponents. And he actually used the police and the anti-riot police against any protesters, and he was imprisoning a lot of activists, he was killing a lot of activists, while with his supporters all with the police force. And now the police force that doesn't have any kind of training or any civil disbursement of a violent sit-down that was happening with the Muslim Brotherhood, had only the tools of violence that they were trained of, and had only the tools that Mohammed Morsi allowed it to have before he was impeached. Mohammed Morsi was democratically impeached. It was a direct democracy. We brought down, as a campaign, and all the opponents, we brought down the constituents to the doorsteps of Mohammed Morsi. We asked him himself to declare an early election, but he refused to hear the people.
Hold on, Ahmed. You say he was, hold on a second, you say he was democratically impeached, Morsi. A lot of people say he was removed by the military as part of a coup. Let me bring Michael in. What do you say?
Yeah, I can't see how this could be called an impeachment. Words have meanings, and there's no way to see that. This is a coup. It's a coup, plain and simple. And everything that Mr. Hawari just said has to make one stop and say, where is this going to lead? Where is this going to lead for Egypt? Where is it going to lead for the United States? Obviously, the forces on the ground that are polarized right now and fighting each other, neither one of them is interested in a democratic future. Neither one of them is interested in any kind of compromise. It's going to be up to people outside of Egypt to define that path and to put pressure on the Egyptians to move toward it. The stakes
Robin, let me just bring Robin in for a quick question. Remind our viewers, Robin, especially here in the United States, why the United States provides Egypt with about $1.5 billion a year in various forms of economic and military assistance.
Well, it's the vast majority of it does go to the military, and it actually ends up a lot of the money back in the United States because it's for equipment and training of the Egyptian security forces. But this goes back to the Arab-Israeli conflict and the first peace process in the late 1970s, and when Egypt began becoming one of the largest recipients of U.S. assistance. The actual economic development is pretty small, but I think as the military cracks down even further, there are likely to be a lot of questions about the use of U.S. equipment, U.S. tear gas, U.S. guns, tanks, armored personnel carriers, other things that put into question what role or what culpability or what responsibility the United States has in all of this. And this will be very tough, I think, in the fall when Congress comes back and has to debate the issue of aid. I think the administration will come under a lot of pressure from Republicans particularly to reconsider how much aid, particularly the kind of helicopters that have been used for security purposes and to try to control the crowds in Cairo.
Robin Wright, thanks very much. Fred Pleitgen, Ahmed El Hawiri, Mike Duran, guys, thanks very much.